Hey guys, you're not going to believe where some of these former OKC players are now. We always wonder what happened to some of the players on a super team that either panned out or crashed miserably. So in this video, we've gathered some information about every player on the 2012 Oklahoma City Thunder roster. Make sure you stick around until the end of the video to find out where the heart and soul of this franchise ended up after that 2012 season. Cole Aldrich is the first player up. Aldrich happened to be in the right place at the right time because he was drafted by the Thunder just 2 years prior to the 2012 season. However, that season would end up being his last on the roster after he was traded along with a few other players to the Houston Rockets. He spent the remainder of that season there before getting flipped again in the offseason to the Sacramento Kings, who chose not to re-sign him. He signed a deal with the New York Knicks and spent 2 years with them, but never really became a star for them. He left after 2015 and joined the Los Angeles Clippers, where he had a few nice performances, but once again he left and signed a 3-year deal with the Minnesota Timberwolves. He was there for 2 of those 3 years before getting cut and signing a deal in the Chinese Basketball Association, where he ended his playing days. Next up, we have Nick Collison. Quite literally a Thunder legend, and for good reason. Collison was drafted by the Seattle Supersonics, and he followed them down to Oklahoma City during their franchise shift. He spent the next 15 seasons on their roster and didn't play for any other team or any other league whatsoever. Collison officially retired from the sport back in 2018, and the franchise chose to retire his number 4 jersey for good, and was even the first official jersey number retired for OKC. While he was never a superstar player, the dude always showed up to work, and he was a great presence in their locker room. Now moving on to Daequan Cook. Daequan Cook bounced around numerous teams and was on quite a few great ones. He was drafted to the Miami Heat and bounced back and forth from the roster in the D-League. However, he did win the 3-point shootout while with the Heat before being traded to the Thunder in 2010. He spent the next 2 full seasons there before being flipped in the offseason to the Rockets. He was waived pretty quickly after that and signed with the Chicago Bulls for the next season. And that year with the Bulls would be his last in the NBA. He bounced around from Moscow to Portugal and then the Iranian Super League and the Israeli League. He played for numerous teams during that span, and he actually had some great years with a few teams. Though from an NBA fan perspective, nobody really heard much from him after he left the league. Kevin Durant is up next. I'm pretty sure the majority of you all know who KD is now, but let's talk about where he's gone since 2012. Durant became one of the best players in the league incredibly quickly. He had a few fantastic years with the Thunder. After that failed title run in 2012 and then again the next couple of seasons, Durant somewhat surprisingly opted to leave the team, joining the 73-9 Golden State Warriors team that had just knocked them out of the playoffs. He spent 3 years with the Warriors, and he won 2 NBA championships in that time, leaving after they lost to the Toronto Raptors in the NBA Finals. He suffered a bad Achilles injury that forced him to miss an entire season, but during that time, he signed a new deal with the Brooklyn Nets to pair with Kyrie Irving. After a missed year, he came back and had one of the most successful scoring seasons ever, but the team lost in the second round of the playoffs. Durant remains a member of the Nets, of course, as they chase a championship this season. Then we have Derek Fisher. Now, it's very important to mention that Fisher was a 5-time NBA champion by the time he joined up with the Thunder during the 2012 season. He was waived by the Rockets prior to joining the Thunder and spent a full year there. After a playoff loss, he decided to go help out the Dallas Mavericks for a year. He suffered a small injury and left that team in the offseason, returning to the Thunder for 1 more season and losing in the Western Conference Finals. After that, he retired from the league and began coaching. He had 2 years with the Knicks before joining the Los Angeles Sparks, where he still remains a coach to this day. Moving on to the beard himself, James Harden, another guy that you all should be very familiar with. Harden was still on a rookie contract in 2012, which is why nobody really knew what they had with him yet. The Thunder chose to trade him after the season to the Rockets, along with a number of other players who were already mentioned. Houston knew right away that he was a generational talent, and he proved that during his next 9 years with the team. He set scoring record after scoring record, but unfortunately never really had success in the playoffs. He even won an MVP award in the process, but it was still that postseason that just haunted him. Last season, it really seemed like he needed a change in scenery, so he demanded a trade from the team. And that's when he was flipped to the Nets to rejoin Durant and get that band back together. He suffered a hamstring injury, though, in his first playoff run with them, but should be fully healthy now moving into a championship or bust kind of season for Brooklyn. It's kind of similar to another team that has a player on this Thunder squad, so stick around until the end of the video to find out who that is. Lazar Hayward is next up. Hayward was yet another piece in that Harden trade to the Rockets. Hayward was quite literally waived like a week after being traded to the Rockets, meaning he didn't have a home for the upcoming season. He joined the Minnesota Timberwolves for a while before being waived, signing a 10-day contract, and then just not being renewed. He went into the NBA D-League at this point, but did get back into the big leagues, joining the New Orleans Pelicans. The only problem was that it had the same outcome. He got waived and went back to the D-League. By 2016, he got traded to the Long Island Nets and got waived after just 20 games. His last season playing basketball came right after that as a member of the Guaro Stellara of the LPB. And who can forget about Serge Ibaka? Ibaka was one of the few players on this 2012 roster that actually remained on the team for the following years. He stayed with the Thunder all the way until the 2016 season, and even then it wasn't by choice. He got traded to the Orlando Magic in exchange for Victor Oladipo and some other assets, one of which wound up being Domantas Sabonis. Ibaka had some nice moments that season with Orlando, but was traded again to the Toronto Raptors. He spent 3 years with that team and even won a championship in 2019. A year removed from that championship, his contract expired and he signed with the LA Clippers, where he still remains. Ibaka has a nice roster around him, and he could potentially find himself back on the big stage in no time. Moving on to Royal Ivey, a player who truthfully had so many career stops during his time in the league. After his 2012 season, he left the team and signed with the Philadelphia 76ers. He spent a year there before leaving and going to the Hawks, albeit getting waived shortly after. Then he went back to the Thunder on a 10-day contract, only to not be renewed there too. At this point, he had no other offers, so he settled in China, and ever since then, he stopped playing and became a head coach. He's coached under numerous teams in both the Development League and the NBA, and nowadays he's the head coach of the national team in South Sudan. Up next, we got Reggie Jackson. Jackson stayed with the Thunder the next couple of years, playing some strong basketball, strong enough to get traded to the Detroit Pistons in 2015. He spent 5 seasons there, and while he was one of their leaders, he found incredibly little success in the win department, which he eventually, of course, grew tired of and reached a buyout with the team in 2020, choosing to sign with the Clippers right after and rejoining former teammate Serge Ibaka. He's heading into his 3rd season with the team, and he's coming off his best year yet. It was a good enough year to sign a nice extension with the Clippers, and for the foreseeable future, it seems like Jackson may have found his home. Now we're moving on to Eric Maynor. Maynor was always a bench player throughout his time in the league after the Thunder. He left at the end of the 2013 season and joined the Portland Trailblazers. They really wanted to hold on to Maynor, but their roster just didn't have room for him, so he left in the offseason to join the Washington Wizards for one pretty uneventful season. After that, he was traded to the Philadelphia 76ers and got waived again. Maynor went over to Europe at this point, playing for numerous international teams but never really sticking anywhere. His final playing stint was in the basketball tournament for Ram Nation. Now he's a coach for the Oklahoma City Blue. Moving on to Nazr Mohammed. Mohammed was seriously nearing the end of his career by the 2012 season with the Thunder. He was traded to OKC mid-season and left to join the Chicago Bulls in the next offseason. He was there for 3 years and even fought LeBron James in the playoffs in 2013. After those 3 seasons, he returned to the Thunder for 1 more year, where he retired at the end of the season and remains retired to this day. And we can't forget about Kendrick Perkins either. He had his most eventful seasons with the Thunder and stayed with them until the 2015 year came around. He was traded to the Utah Jazz before being waived a day later. Then he signed with the Cleveland Cavaliers that next year and then left to join the Pelicans the year after that. His transitions didn't stop there though, as he left again to rejoin the Cavaliers for another year before realizing that it's probably time to call it quits. Nowadays, he works as a television sports analyst, where many of you might have seen him pretty often. Next, we have Ryan Reid, a man of mystery to say the least. Reid was bouncing back and forth between the D-League team and the Thunder's official roster, being constantly called up and sent back down for years. Eventually, he stuck with the Tulsa 66ers for some years before leaving and going into the LNB Pro A. 4 years later, he left and joined St. John's Edge of NBL Canada. Nowadays, nobody really knows if he's officially retired or maybe he's still out there playing somewhere. Thabo Sefolosha was another great player on this roster. Like Mohammed and some other players on this 2012 team, his career didn't go much further after this. He left the Thunder in 2014 in a sign-and-trade to go to the Atlanta Hawks. He suffered a season-ending injury there in his first year, but still stayed for 2 more seasons afterwards anyways. After his contract was up, he signed a multi-year deal with the Utah Jazz. He didn't play bad there, but had a suspension late in his second year with the squad and was ultimately not re-signed. His final season he spent with the Houston Rockets in 2019, and he announced his retirement from the league in 2021. And finally, we come to Russell Westbrook. Westbrook, of course, was the heart and soul of this OKC franchise for years. After the 2012 season, Westbrook remained with the Thunder all the way until 2019. He went through a number of coaching and roster overhauls, but stuck with them until he finally grew frustrated and demanded a trade. He was sent to the Houston Rockets, where he was eliminated in the second round of the playoffs by the eventual champions that year, the LA Lakers. Then he was traded again to the Washington Wizards, where he barely got that team into the playoffs and quickly lost in the first round. He was involved in one of the biggest trades this past offseason, where he wound up with the Los Angeles Lakers joining Anthony Davis and LeBron James. This year will be his first year out in LA, and that team has some high hopes of bringing home a championship. And that about does it for this video about all the players who were on that failed 2012 Oklahoma City Super Team. If you enjoyed, please be sure to leave a like and subscribe, and check out what happened to every player drafted above Russell Westbrook up next.